Welcome everybody to our today's ComAI lectures with Christian Greiffenhagen, to pronounce it now in German. I'm not sure how is it pronounced in English?
I'm not gonna,
Greiffenhagen?
I'm not going to tell you.
Okay. Well, there can be some kinds of misinterpretation then. Okay, who will present here today? So Christian, he's professor of sociology at the Department of Applied Social Sciences of the Hong Kong Polytechnic University. Before that, he was at Oxford, but as I just learned, he did study at the Technical University of Karlsruhe, now KIT. So this is one place where we already crossed somehow, because I was also working there for about 1 year. Then he went to Oxford University, where he got his PhD. Originally, Christian's background is in computer science or theoretical informatics, how it is called in Germany. And then he moved more and more into social sciences. The step of this move was a position as postdoctoral fellow at the Department of Sociology at Manchester University. Then he went to Loughborough University, where he was senior lecturer at the Department of Social Sciences. Then associate professor at the Department of Sociology at the Chinese University of Hong Kong, and now, as I already said, at the Hong Kong Polytechnic University. His main areas are, beside others, as I have learned, conversational analysis, ethnomethodology, video-based ethnography, and his primary research interests are in STS, science and technology studies, and human-computer interaction. There are many recent publications. I only want to mention some of them. The visibility of digital money in the Journal of Sociology, then Back to the Control Room, Managing Autistic Work in the Journal of Computer-Supported Cooperative Work, Configuring Prospective Sensations, Experiments Preparing Participants, What They Will Feel, Symbolic Interaction, and also recent publication, Orchestrate Openings in Video Calls, Getting Young Left Behind Children to Greet Their Migrant Parents in the Journal of Pragmatics. So you already realize, so it's a crossing of social sciences, ethnomethodology, human-machine interaction. This is also somehow the framing of Christian Greiffenhagen's ComAI lecture today with the title Human-AI Interaction, How Hotel Customers Are Disciplined by a Facial Recognition Kiosk. Welcome to Brain.
Thank you. I'm very excited to be here for both personal and professional reasons. So Bremen is the city of where my father was born, and my grandfather was working, and so I'm very excited to be here and also to learn more about Zampi. And we can have a discussion in German, but I'll be doing the talk in English. So, what I want to talk about today is automated AI-driven communication technologies. So things like Amazon Alexa, chatbots, and Microsoft Connect, where you interface not through a keyboard, but where your body becomes the controller. And point of these is that these are communicating with us. They are designed as cognitive subjects, as autonomous systems, and what's interesting is that how is this done in practice? I mean, these are design intentions, but do they actually work out? And so we're going to be looking at a very mundane setting, a fully autonomous robotic hotel in China. So no service personnel, except as the same way with self-service supermarket checkouts, there's still people guarding you that you don't steal, but you are doing all the work. And so you're going to have someone who's coming in and then using the focus is this facial recognition technology to check it. But there's also a guidance robot there, but I'm not going to be looking into that. So the focus is on facial recognition. Now, that's typically, especially in the context of China, associated with surveillance. But it's also much more mundane. I mean, how many of you have today used facial recognition to get access to your phone, right? So there's a much more mundane use of facial recognition. Passport control as well. These days, most of the time I can pass the border without interacting with any human, but only with a machine. So it's become part of everyday life. It's really everywhere. And so what interests me is how do guests communicate with this facial recognition kiosk? So the focus is on the service industry, and the service industry is doing weird technologies, robots, and even robotic hotels. So those are the kinds of things that people imagine. What interests me is how does this change the role of the customer? Now we've had, there's a literature in sociology which looks at the transition from service to self-service. And one of the things that has happened is that more and more work that was previously done by service personnel has been given to the customers who are becoming, doing the work. They're becoming working customers, doing unpaid labor. So from customer to king to the working customer. So this is sort of, I try to find some old images capturing the good old days when the customer was king in different settings, in the grocery store, the restaurant, the bank, and the airport. And this is how things look like today. You get your own groceries, you check out yourself.
You pay yourself. McDonald's, you even sort of looks like a phone. The ATM, of course, is one example where there's no more contact. And these days, I have to check in my luggage here myself using some strange kiosk. So more and more work is being done by customer themselves. So what interests me in this talk is what we have now with this facial recognition. Is this still only a working customer? Or is there perhaps something more? Is this concept strong enough? Or do we need a stronger concept? And the argument I want to make is because we are now communicating with machines and we're trying for them to understand us, it's actually more, because we're not just working with our bodies, we're working on our bodies. And so we're being disciplined by the machine. Okay, so the idea here is that hotel guests don't just have to do a lot of work, they have to do more, because they have to present their body and in a way perform for the machine. That's the idea here. And so they're not just working with their bodies, but on their bodies. That's the point of the paper.
Okay, so obviously this is a comedy sketch, it's exaggerated, but there's something in there which I think a lot of us have experienced, right? These intelligent communication technologies require us to modify what we do. I don't know whether any of you have used voice dictation, voice to text. I don't talk like I talk now. I talk like this, so my phone understands me, right? I talk in a very pronounced way. Here, they're trying to switch from Scottish to English, which is the whole joke about the whole thing. But the key thing here is that it results in strange feelings. We do silly things. It's a bit embarrassing. We have to modify what is natural to be understood by this idiotic machine. And the reactions can be anger and frustration. Of course, here it was exaggerated. But it captures what we've seen. So this is the idea here, that in order to be understood by a machine, we modify what we do, we discipline ourselves.
Okay, so discipline, of course, is related to sort of how these algorithmic technologies govern us, algorithmic governance, algorithmic power. There's a lovely idea by I think it's Anish, the idea of algoracy. But of course, also, if you hear the word discipline, there's one theorist you can't, which is Foucault. And what I like about that, it's not so much the notion about self-discipline, where we discipline ourselves in the absence of someone, but how this concerns the body. So that's what interests me here, is how discipline can be the focus on the body. So that's sort of the things I take from here. Okay, so a bit of background. As I already said, there's a huge literature on facial recognition, which has been likened to the new fingerprint as the key way of identifying people. There's two important distinctions here. On the one hand, we can distinguish between voluntary and non-voluntary forms of facial recognition. When you open your phone, I'd argue it's voluntary. You could have done the PIN code, but there are many forms in terms of surveillance where it's non-voluntary. And of course, whether it's for verification or identification, whether we are just checking, are you the one you're claiming to be, or is there something else? Most of the research is really on non-voluntary use for identification. There's a huge literature on racial bias, on panopticon, a lot of critique. Facial recognition is the plutonium of AI. Sort of this idea of really, there's a lot of bias incorporated into these technologies. The voluntary use for verification, it's much less studied, but actually it's what we encounter most of the time. So that's what we're doing in this paper. In China, everyone knows China doing lots of surveillance, but it's also used in everyday life a lot. It's used for getting access to buildings. It's used for payment. So there's a lovely article about a Swiss newspaper reporter who reports about trying to resist this and then doing it and saying it's actually quite convenient. And that's actually the interesting thing. There is much less resistance on these technologies in China because convenience, it's not sort of all of it is Big Brother forcing people. A lot of this is accepted by people who just think it's convenient and are happy with the disadvantages of surveillance. So that's the key thing here. But of course, there are also a lot of criticisms. Now, as I already mentioned, there's a whole literature on the sociology of self-service. There's these histories of self-service. And the key thing here is this change of customers doing more and more unpaid work, doing work that was previously done by the service personnel. Part of the sort of rationalization of the service industry. And as always, there are these unintended consequences, these irrational aspects of the rationality. For example, theft. So you have, as so often, something that's supposedly automating everything, but it's just displacing work. So we have work that before was done by service personnel. Now it's done partly by customers, and the service personnel has to do new things. For example, making sure that the customers don't steal. So the official automation story never quite works in practice. But one of the things is often a feeling of disenchantment. Who has ever walked away from a supermarket self-checkout because it didn't work and just gave up on the shopping? Anyone? Right, thank you. So right, I mean, these things can be very frustrating. And finally, obviously, this is part of human-machine communication, sort of new emergent fields. But actually, I'm drawing more on earlier tradition in human-computer interaction. In particular, a very early study by Lucy Suchman. If you don't know this study, it was a very cool study on one of the earliest user studies on very smart cognitive scientists using a photocopier and doing a simple task of that and showing how what the people were thinking they were doing and which state the machine in didn't match, and how there were breakdowns in communication. Now, there's a lot of very interesting recent studies in HCI which inspired this. There's a lovely early study by Harper and Mentis on Kinect use, where they exactly study how playing these games, people start to do exaggerated movements, and they're supposedly natural, but in order to be understood, they make they sort of exaggerate movements. There's a study on this now robots, these humanoid robots, where again people modify how they talk to the robot. And a very cool paper, one of the earliest studies on Alexa, voice interfaces in everyday life, where again how people talk to the machine, to Alexa, in particular in a group setting. It's completely useless, and people have to stop being quiet while you address Alexa, otherwise the whole thing breaks down. Okay, so the data for this was, and I should emphasize this, the study was done by a PhD student of mine, and she did great ethnographic field work in a service in a hotel chain in China, which we'll call the L Hotel. Did video recording in the lobby. We adopted an opt-out mode of participation, so we have signs. We're doing a study. If you don't want to be recorded, raise your hand or let us know. And we have a corpus of 412 hotel guests who checked in. This is the hotel. And I'll just talk you through the journey of checking in. So how you become aware that this is a strange hotel, how you present yourself, how you perform for the machine, and then how people expressed emotions towards the machine. Okay, so I'll start with a very simple thing. Someone coming to the hotel, trying to open the door, it doesn't open. They realize there is no hotel person opening the door for them, and so they have to do it themselves. How are they going to do it? They see a sign, a keypad on the left that is legible. They see a QR code. QR codes are very present in China. People know QR code, scan them. They're going to read that the PIN to open the door are the last 4 digits of your phone, and they're going to just input the code on the keyboard, and then welcome to the L Hotel. So fairly easy stuff. What I find interesting is this moment of trying to open the door and immediately understanding there will be a way of opening it and solving the problem quite quickly. So there is this becoming aware stage. Then there's some working, and in a way, I mean, this is a prime example of service to self-service, right? The person doing exactly what the doorman would have done in the good old days. Now, once they enter the room, there's a facial recognition kiosk straight ahead, and a lot of them immediately go there. So they see there's still a guard here, but most of them ignore them and directly go to the facial recognition kiosk as here. So quick look, but ignored, and we go to the kiosk and start the process. Sometimes people approach that person and have a quick chat with them. I've booked here, and then they're being sort of directed immediately to go to the kiosk. So we have another paper where we're trying to I mean, this person who's still there is really interesting, and a lot of the times they're sort of trying to not interact, and there's a whole way of not looking at people, but that's a different paper. Okay, so I'd argue that this is typical working customer stuff. They're doing things, they're having to figure out how this works, they have to do things that were previously done by a service personnel. Okay, now it gets a bit more interesting. Now they approach, they put their ID card in and they start the facial recognition process. And the first thing they have to do, and another show of hands, who's ever used a photo booth for passport? Okay, so this used to be quite common. And the first thing you have to do in these things, of course, is to make sure that you are in the right thing. I mean, the old ones, they had that you could adjust the seat so you are in the right, you're nicely captured, right? So you use the feedback of a mirror or something to make sure you are in the viewing frame. And that's what our guests do as well. So the first thing is people step, because they have to put the card in very close, and then that's too close to the thing, so they step into the right, so that their face fits into the viewing frame. They use this viewing frame to adjust their position. This is not a one-off thing. People do slight adjustments throughout the process. So we try to sort of capture this. This is reconstructed. It's not directly. Roughly, they're doing this because we don't have exactly the view of the machine, but that's what they do. Okay, so people present themselves to the machine. That's not just where you stand, but how you look. Now, in the photo booth, you might make sure you look nice. You sort of do a bit of adjustment because you're taking a photo. This is not the concern here. Here, it's more to do with removing obstacles. People know that certain things might obstruct the facial recognition kiosk. Hats, glasses, masks, COVID, right? So people, without being told, very often remove these obstacles. And it exhibits a common sense understanding. They don't have to be told of this, although sometimes they are. People do this on themselves. These things can hinder recognition. And other sort of people passing by. Another thing is, very often you're not alone when you go in a hotel. You're checking in with a partner, for example. This partner is an obstacle. And so here we have a lovely example of a girl doing the thing and telling her partner, go away, because you might be the obstacle. So we have that as well. So, and people observing what people are doing, if there's problems, might suggest to observe, oh, glasses, look at the camera, service workers, you better take off the glasses and take a step backwards. So people also make comments on where to stand and how to look. Okay, so people do this presenting yourself to the machine. Very typical working customer things. They start to put in some things on the keypad, but then they start to work on their body, where they stand, removing obstacles. And so here, the body is both a tool that is doing the work, but it's also becoming an object because it's the thing that is being assessed, right? And so people are aware that they're being analyzed. And there's this lovely thing that both a subject doing something and an object being analyzed. So I think there's a nice sort of tension here. Okay. And then it gets even more interesting. So once the process starts, the machine is doing 6 directions. Close your eyes, open your eyes, shake your head, stay still, please open your mouth, close your mouth. Okay, 6 of these. If after these 6 you haven't been recognized, we're calling this one cycle, is our terminology. It repeats, right? It just goes through the whole thing again. If you haven't been recognized, it does it for a third time. And if after 3 cycles, so 3 times 6, 18 of these directions, you haven't been recognized, it gives you a failure message. Facial recognition failed, please try again. So here we have one example of a very smooth case where the customer does everything perfectly, and so he gets recognized after 6 instructions. Okay, so we have these instructions, and the customer is doing them very nicely, following what they're doing, and it doesn't say I have succeeded. It just moves to the next step that tells you it has worked, right? So I would argue we've now leaving the photo behind and doing more. I mean, they're doing I'm using performance here, and I don't know that's quite the right word, but they're doing something, right? They're just not just standing still for a photo. They have to follow the instructions of the machine. Now, the technical rationale for this is what's called liveness detection. So I don't steal your passport and then use a photo of you to pretend I'm you. Okay, so that's the technical reason is to have some guard that there's really a person there, a live person. Okay, but it does end up in this sort of performance. Now, I'm normally I am a qualitative researcher, but with 417 guests, you can do some sort of descriptive statistics of how quickly does this work, right? So we had 412 guests, 28, the kiosk was broken or the ID card didn't work, 23, facial recognition succeeds, but then there's other technical problems. So we have 361 where the whole thing sort of runs as it's supposed to do. And what you can see here is during the first cycle, we have 79 people who succeed, which is 22%. By the third cycle, so still no official error message, we had 86%, which is good, but not everyone. And then we get to the second cycle. By that time, people really know how to do it, and we get to 97%. So by the first cycle of the second attempt, almost everyone is recognized. So what this involves are these movements, right? Closing your eyes, shaking your head, and opening the mouth. I think the opening mouth is the strangest. I mean, and I think it's to do with the fact that it's something we normally don't do. Shaking head, I disagree with you. Closing eyes, I do as well. But there's something strange about these opening mouth things. And you can see it even in the people. They start to smile. They think it's strange. And there is something very, very, very funny about opening your mouth. It's often accompanied by a smile. So they're doing these bodily movements for the machine, and this mouth, I think, it's not a normal thing, because opening, closing eyes, it's blinking, shake head, stay still, disagreement. Where do we do this except at the dentist, right? And it's also, I think, mouths are particularly intimate places. So what I'm trying to show you here is how the customers don't just perform for the machine, but they also change their performance. Because if there's a problem, right, if they don't get immediately recognized, they start to change. Now, that's very explicit if you get a failure message, right? But it happens before. We've all been socialized. If I ask you a question and you answer, and I repeat the question, you know your answer was wrong, right? I mean, that's how classroom interaction works. So the repeat of an instruction or a question asked and answer tells you there was a problem with your response. And so even earlier, people on the second time hearing the same instruction, they know my initial response didn't quite work. I have to do something new. So question repeats are marks of a failed answer in primary classrooms, and we've internalized this. So what do people do? They modify what they do. They do it more properly. They become good customers. So here's an example of changing how to do shaking head. The first time, I think you can see, it's going to be a very slight shaking. But the second time, we have a really good shaking your head. So it's tricky to capture this, but it's something like this. The first time is sort of a half shake. The second time is a proper shake. Here you can see them next to each other, cut at the same time, the first and the second. And so the first time there's sort of very little shaking, and the second time is proper shaking. So customers are upgrading their performance. They're becoming good customers. Same thing with closing eyes. And there's something interesting. The first time you hear close your eyes, you don't know how long, right? I mean, do I just blink? Do I do it long? And so, but if you know that close your eyes is followed by open your eyes, what a lot of customers start to do is on the second cycle, they close their eyes until they hear open your eyes, right? So they keep them closed until they hear that. So here you can see this is every 0.3 seconds. The first time they close their eyes, they have them closed they do a blinking, right? Just quick close. So by the time they hear open your eyes, their eyes are already open. And we have some funny things of people, what do you do if your eyes are open and someone tells you open your eyes? So I have people doing really sort of trying to raise their eyebrows really high. You can see it a bit there. But the second time, they're doing it much more controlled, right? Close your eyes, 0.3, 0.3, 0.3, 0.3 seconds, and then they hear open your eyes, and they open their eyes. So what I'm trying to argue here is that the customers are performing there's more than a photo. They're doing something, and they're disciplining themselves. They're doing these embodied movements for the machine, including the mouth, and they're changing their behavior for the machine. The machine is in total control because there's no feedback, right? There's no interaction, no negotiation. And it's a very interesting contrast with how we interact with people. If you, in most cases where there is a failed response, and the best example is parent-child communication here, brush your teeth, typically is repeated. First you increase the volume, and then it gets more and more. You change how you direct until, there's a lovely paper, you shepherd the child, you take over their body and move them to where they're supposed to do. The point here is, it's the instruction giver who is changing. But here, the instruction giver is not changing at all, right? It's a machine. And so there's a constant beat almost, and the only agent who can change is the customer, who has to adapt and try to guess what is it that could be the problem. And so the machine is controlling the whole interaction. So the whole thing sometimes leads to expressions of emotions. So people get frustrated. After a failure message, people go and start to swear. But it can get earlier. If the process doesn't work quickly, people get annoyed even during the third cycle. People get annoyed, but there's also something else. There's a lot of smiles in these videos. You've seen them perhaps in an earlier example. And so a lot of the times people do these smiles while they're doing it. And this is partly because very often they're not alone. They're with a partner, with a friend or lover or something. And so they are, of course, observing the person doing these strange movements. And I think they're treating the whole thing as funny, embarrassing. So we have people smiling at what people are doing. Or even laughing out loud and mocking. There's another video where she kicks him while he's doing it. So the whole thing is sometimes frustrating, but there's something more going on. I think it's to do with because people have to do these things on their bodies, and the bystanders laugh at them, they mock them, and I think it's partly because this is embarrassing behavior that you have to do. In a photo, you objectify yourself, but you are in control. You want to take the photo. But here, you have much less control, and the machine is telling you what to do. And so, just to wrap up, I think this is a very interesting example of this idea of how we move from a working customer to a disciplined customer. Now, Hochschild in a book on emotional labor did a very nice shift from the alienation in factories that was described from Marx to the alienation in the service industry by flight attendants. And she has this very long, where she tries to sort of say, in the service industry, something more is going on than in the factory. And the something more is that you have to not just work at the assembly line, but you have to smile at obnoxious guests, right? Assholes are in front of you, and you still have to say, have a nice day. And so you have to you have to control your emotions. You have to suppress your feelings. And this emotional work. And I think I would argue there's something similar here for customers who I mean, yes, we do ATMs already, we do super self checkouts, but while we're doing this, we can do what we want with our bodies if we follow the things. But now, in communicating with the machines, we have to really start to control how we appear to be recognized. So we have to work, people have to work not just with their body, but on their body. And possibly we could argue that this is a sort of new form of dehumanization, right? Hochschild again said automation leads to more impersonal service. Other people talk about technological dehumanization, and it changes how people view themselves in these interactions. And so perhaps we can say it used to be the case that people had to, the service personnel smiled for the customer, now the customer has to smile for the machine. And finally, just a little thing, there's a lovely idea by when it comes to technology, we often talk about anthropomorphism, how we endow machines with human-like abilities, but perhaps we can see the opposite. Because in order to try to be understood and recognized, we have to imagine, how does the machine see us? What could be the problem for the machine not recognizing us? And so we have to actually put ourselves into, how does the machine think? And there's a lovely paper by Jennifer Tazey on seeing like a rover, how in the Mars mission, the scientists sort of tried to imagine what it would be like to be the rover on Mars. And she coins this term technomorphism. So not making the machine more like us, but making us more like a machine. And so I would argue that the customers are making themselves machine legible by trying to think, how does a facial recognition kiosk see? Thank you very much. Good. So I think they are different, and not everyone has. So they're definitely more prevalent than here. Some of them clearly struggle and they don't know it, but I think you're right so some shaking head things are more common. I don't quite know about the range of different ones. That's a nice question. Okay, thank you. So the first one, I mean, I think I think the working customer sort of comes out of the sociology of work, and it was really tied to. So it's typically settings which self-characterize as self-service. So McDonald's and ATM, right? So there are these, whereas your example is typically not associated. So sitting down and being served, saying, waiter, I would like to have a pizza, and then they bring the pizza. That's typically not quite the thing. It's more, I don't know whether they are, so in Asia these days, menus are disappearing and QR codes are there, and you're supposed to order even in a proper restaurant yourself. So it's all the things where it's very easy to sort of say, it used to be like this, and now something that used to be done by a service personnel is done by us. Where that's where the concept comes from. On the governing, I think I don't know. I'm too micro to be. So I would rather I'd rephrase the question. How could we answer it empirically? What setting could we get access to answer that? So, I mean, and I guess it would be perhaps meetings where people discuss why to use machines, how to. But for example, this one, I'm pretty sure at this stage is not driven by cost serving. It's actually part of the advertisement. It's part. I mean, this is a promotion gimmick. Right? I mean, it's. I don't think this is driven by cost saving. It's driven by doing something new, doing something novel, and you get young people going to these hotels to see what it's like. So at this point, this is more it's an advertisement rather than part of strict cost saving mechanisms. No, there's a lot of. I've done a lot of video studies, and it's surprising how little people care. And typically, you can see when they care. So I my first study was in a school classroom with kids, and most of the time they forgot. If they did a dirty joke, they would point at the camera, it's most of the time because it's fairly mundane stuff, and we're recording people when they're trying to do something and they want to get it done. So I'm not too worried. I'm sure there is something, but I don't think it's in any way significant, because often you can see it if people do react to it.
Sorry. Nobody has a question at the moment. I would like to ask a follow-up question to what Selim was saying, but frame it a bit differently. So, of course, taking your example with the hotel, this is, as you said, a kind of advertising measure. They're trying out. Maybe it's also about learning more about technologies like this. But referring back to the slides at the beginning of your presentation, where you were highlighting, for example, McDonald's, okay, and other companies who are now using comparable, so less sophisticated, but somehow comparable systems for daily service. But the question I really have, and I understand you are doing more micro analysis, but I even would say it relates to the micro, it is somehow a new inscription of class. So it worked for McDonald's. It would not work for a proper restaurant. So there you still have service. And I think if I relate this to your argument of performing for the machine, what I'm really wondering is if this not also might be again kind of reinscription of social inequality. So there are people who have to perform a lot for the machine to get their services. And there are other people who are well positioned in society who don't have to care for the machine. So would you say that there are also such kind of class differences related to that from your point of view? Or would you say it's a too general interpretation of your analysis?
I'm not sure whether it's worse or better. So I thought a bit like you, and then I saw the baggage tag at Cathay Pacific at Hong Kong Airport, where the business class had to do it themselves as well. So there is no person anymore. They have to use the machine. Everyone has to. I don't know. Okay, private planes, yes, but so it's quite. I mean, I would say business class people flying business class is no longer. I mean, we've gone quite high in society with that, and so they had to use the machine. So I think it's spreading very quickly, and it's spreading wider than I thought it would do. So I think yes, but I think you're right. There is, of course, it starts both at cheaper places and, of course, scale. Right? I mean, McDonald's is one of the things is they can run it out, and there's millions of those restaurants, whereas there's only a few 3-star ones. But there is, it's somewhere in between. It's starting at the bottom, but it's going wider than I thought.
But this makes it, from my point of view, even more interesting. I might continue, because normally social change goes from the upper class down. Very often, differences or new things are introduced by the rich ones, by the better positioned ones. And then it goes or went down to society in the sense that lower classes started to replicate. And here the argument would be, okay, it starts as a broad measure, yeah, and then spreads in society for cost saving.
Yeah, so I mean, I think in that sense, you really, a cool thing is the menu. So which I think starts with the kiosk at McDonald's. And now, if you go to mainland China, to fairly well restaurants, menus have gone. There's only QR codes. You can't get a menu anymore. You have to use your phone in very good restaurants. So that would be, I think, along your one, that the technology is sort of spreading into more high class establishments. It's lovely. So now, the problem, of course, is we typically, I think, if we hear deceleration, we associate it with nice things, right? So I think being frustrated because the scanning doesn't work. So there's a question here: is the idea of deceleration purely about efficiency? How quickly can you get the task done? Then you're right. But I don't think these people feel, I mean, so is deceleration a good or a bad thing? By things not working, or you're trying to fill in a form and you've done 90% of the form and it disappears. Yes, it's decelerating, but it's not a pleasant feeling. So, but it's not. That's an interesting. You're right. This does take longer than quickly checking the passport against is this you? Yeah, but I don't have a. It's just a nice to think about the word decelerization in this context. It's nice. Thank you.
Thanks a lot for coming and this interesting talk.